So next up, we've got the most inappropriately named game series ever, Final Fantasy, with Final Fantasy XV Comrades. Stefan, over to you.
Yes, this is going to kind of tie into with actually our discussions previously. For those who don't know, Final Fantasy XV was a single-player game, and it had a few DLCs for playing a different character. The single-player game was 4 young men battling against an evil empire. Now, very early on, there was a bit of a backlash at Final Fantasy XV. There was no multiplayer. In today's games, they wanted a multiplayer mode. Now, they did say they was going to bring this as a DLC, and currently, right now, as of about 2 weeks ago, there is a DLC beta for Final Fantasy XV. Very similar to the main game, you basically create a character, and with 4 other people, you go out and you basically do quests. And this is going to like kind of bump up the already existing single player. The question I'm kind of going to bring to everybody is this a good marketing strategy, and is this something that we're going to see in the future, where a single player game starts off and then all of a sudden further down the line, and in fact this is like almost like a year and a half since its release, they throw in what should have been, in some people's view, in the game from the beginning?
No, to be honest, my opinion on this is it's completely wrong. It's Final Fantasy. It doesn't need multiplayer. If you want to play multiplayer, play 14 or 11. They're MMOs. Go away. Leave the standard series of Final Fantasy games single player like they've always been. Not every game needs multiplayer.
My standpoint on this is that Final Fantasy 15 took a decade to make. It was a very ambitious game. If they want to, if the engine's capable of it and they want to cram as much crap as they can there, I think that's value, not necessarily a bad thing.
Well, what they've done is, this is a kind of a weird one, is they've made it standalone. So it's, well, at least the beta is a standalone item. You don't have to have the disc to put it in. I don't know if that's going to happen when it publishes it, but it is a standalone extra. I think they had a lot of problems in the development side of things, and what they tried to kind of placated a few people was that, look, we are going to do this is what we're going to do later on. As you quite rightly said, some people didn't want to see multiplayer in it. For the newer people like myself who've never actually played Final Fantasy whatsoever, I'm actually quite enjoying it. I think it adds more to the lore. I was really, really happy to see it. It was just the practice of it. And the reason why I brought it up is because there's another game that has a similar sort of practice where it's I'm trying to think, it's Friday the 13th. They brought out a multiplayer mode, and now they're creating a single player mode, but the game's already out. And I'm just wondering if this is a practice that is going to come up. Is this something that we're going to see more and more of, where they're going to do one segment and then halfway, a year later, put in the rest of it?
I think it is something that we're going to see more of. Obviously, we already know that the Final Fantasy VII remake is going to be a multi-part series, and I do think more games are going to go like that. And in a way, it kind of comes down to price. If this multiplayer DLC thing is free, fine. If it doesn't cost very much, fine. And like you say, if you potentially can buy it as a totally separate entity to the main game without having the main game, then that's fine. But shoehorning it in is not good to me.
My personal opinion on this is that this is good, and this is how things are going to go in future. I brought to the table on this week's Big Boss Babble that you can't make eSports happen, So what I was really saying with that subject was that you can't set out and say, oh, and the multiplayer bit's going to be brilliant and everyone's going to love the single player bit and we're going to do an eSports bit and we're going to have this big DLC structure for single player missions. You can't really plan that far ahead. What you need to do is do what you're going to do best. And in the case of the core Final Fantasy team, that very much is kind of the, whatever they used to call it, the 5 fingers or the various echelons of what they aimed for renewing every single game, which is amazing graphics, outstanding video visuals, great soundtrack, overwhelming story. a new battle system, and I think that was what they used to say was what they aimed for every single game, and they definitely delivered that with Final Fantasy 15. People were blown away. It was open world. It had open world bits and bobs in it, which hasn't been properly in the game since Final Fantasy 9, in my opinion. 10 was when it started kind of grabbing you by the hand and dragging you through the land and through the various bumps and bobs, and even 9 was quite hands-on actually. But yeah, and so 15 definitely delivered. The single player was overwhelming. I read stories and journals online from people who had never played games before, who had laughed at their children for playing games and were now sitting there and playing Final Fantasy 15. And so I think, yes, it deserves an extended lifespan. And if they can do that in a way that uses the same engine and the same visuals with the multiplayer, then, bless them, go for it. And if, somehow they manage to turn the card game into some, esport, then, once again, bless them, do it. I think they have proven that core game works, and that the pitch, the story, the music, the visuals, blah, 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 works. And so building on it, in my opinion, is nothing to be ashamed of. I'm all for the live product thing that we're going through now, like Rainbow Six getting new operators added every year. I'm all for stuff like that. I'm all for there never being a Rocket League 2 or a Crusader Kings 3, because they are just continually adding new expansions, even if one of them is a visual upgrade 10 years after the original one upgraded. And so I think Final Fantasy 15 joining those ranks, I think that's good. And considering how much Square Enix let me down by dropping IO Interactive on Hitman, which in my opinion was, living the dream with that amazing kind of weekly content schedule that they had. I'm quite happy with Final Fantasy 15 as it stands.
Yeah, I think that to go back to the original point is whether we'll see more of it, and I think in the AAA space we definitely will. Purely because games now are getting to the point where they take so much effort and so much time to develop. I think a lot of developers are going to see the advantages of, maybe getting the base game up and running, shoving that out the door, and then following it up and kind of building upon it to get to that full experience. I mean, as long as they're upfront about it, like we might talk about this soon with No Man's Sky. They obviously announced all this stuff. It wasn't in the game, and now it's gradually getting put into it. If they hadn't announced it up front, there wouldn't be a big backlash now. It would just be like you're saying, they're adding extra things and it's getting better over time. And I think that kind of development cycle for new big AAA games is the way it's going to go forward. They go, right, okay, so we've got the base game up and running, it works, it's golden, go. We'll follow up later. We'll give you more stuff later. We just want to get this in your hands now. And I think that's kind of what they're doing with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, is that there's going to be so much put into that game, and people are expecting so much as well. So they're just like, okay, we know you've wanted this for a long, long time. We're going to try and get the first part out to you as soon as we possibly can, and then we'll follow up with the rest of it later. And to be honest, I don't see that as a bad thing. Again, though, from what we were talking about before, depending on how it works financially. Can I buy the full game and get everything else free? Fine. Can I get this part and then I have to buy this part and then I have this? That I don't like.
To go back to the base question of what Removable Sandy was saying was, is this something that's going to be coming, happen often? And I think that the question for me is that were the games intended this way? Like, where's like Friday the 13th? Was the game done? Or was this just something that they didn't have time for, and they're like, oh, now it's a new thing? Are these games really done when they come out these days? I say no. I say games these days are hardly finished. This is proven by the dozens and dozens of bugs we find. And I think this is something that isn't going to change. I think this is something that's going to continue to happen and probably evolve into more of either a good thing or a horrible thing. I can't say for sure.
But sorry, just on that point, I am going to take us off on a slight tangent now, if I may.
No.
Dun,
Yeah,
dun,
and
dun.
the fact that everyone brings up the fact that there's this bug, there's this bug, there's this bug in all these modern games, and everyone's going, oh no, it never used to happen. Yes, it did. If you watch any speed run of any old retro game, you will see that old retro games were fundamentally broken. They break those games in half. I mean, I've seen people literally in Super Mario Land 2 walk through the code of the game and trigger the end sequence. And this can be done on original hardware. Games have always had bugs. Games have always been broken. It's just, I think now, obviously, they're more visible now because of the internet.
But I think I can see your point. Are we in that case? Then the question: are we expecting more in terms of a polished? With back then, it was coding. Certain things didn't work well. It was a port over, and they did the best they could. Or is it now they just don't have the time, and they've got to get it out because if they don't ship it, it may break the bank.
And I mean, another question is, what was the game's original intention? Like for Final Fantasy XV, it's a single-player RPG. Is it right to have those funds going towards a multiplayer aspect, or should they be making more, aspects to the story? Should they be adding to the single-player aspect to it? Where should they allocate their funds, and is that right?
Yeah, I think at least on the Final Fantasy 15, if I remember, it was something they wanted to do early on, but development time and problems really early on in the whole package, and the fact that the internet was saying, "Well, hang on, you've been trying on this single player game now for so long. Why haven't we got it?" That stopped them from potentially doing it. I think from gauging from the developers, they wanted to do a lot more and have almost a polished game ready for you to be done. Just timescales and the general internet, gouging them to get the game out, stopped that from happening.
I think in very many ways, this is almost like a ever so slightly twisted Kickstarter, wherein with Kickstarter, the more you earn, obviously most companies set up these ambitious goals that they want to achieve if they hit certain targets. And many of them don't actually, intend to hit those targets. And so they take a little bit longer to implement because they had roughly, only roughly outlaid what it was that they needed to do. And so the kind of current publisher structure from many of the mid-tier, the non-top 5, I guess, publishers appears to be based around that, and it seems to be going on that. So I get a sneaking suspicion that Final Fantasy 15 did well on launch day, and then it did amazingly on launch week, and then it did outstandingly in launch month, and oh my god, people are still talking about it. So yeah, those ideas that you said, keep doing it because it's making us money, so those ideas that we said hell no to before, the gates are lifted now. And once again, I think that's okay as a publishing structure. I think that a publisher is very much that kind of like, I guess, wealthy uncle figure that says, yes, you are doing well. You are now trusted with a little bit more money or whatever it is, And so I think this kind of thing, this kind of like a product staying live and being a live product, even if it wasn't intended as one, can be very good for the industry because it takes players who only bought it for single player and introduces them to new areas, but it also allows developers who normally specialize in one area to further specialize. And I think this Final Fantasy kind of situation is somewhat of an odd situation because this almost seems more like they're ticking off things they wanted to do anyway. Yeah. Whereas I think most developers, like if you took, for instance, Obsidian, with Pillars of Eternity, if they got more money or if they had an amazing reaction, they would probably build a more in-depth and more true to, heavy RPG form expansion to it. They'd go, hey, look, you are the most hardcore, fans that we have, and you deserve a reward. And I think that kind of growth in the industry is good.
Yeah, but also, sorry to but I heard a snap, and I think that was Stefan. But I think as a counterpoint to that, if this kind of development does become the norm, I think we're going to end up with unfinished and orphaned games. Like the developer's going to make a game, put it out there, it flops, so they don't deliver on the rest of the content, and then you end up with games that are basically unfinished.
You mean the old I'm trying to be an esport type of game where they go, hey, look, we're going to make a single player game, and if everybody buys this, which they totally will because we're amazing, we'll make the multiplayer aspect that we've totally got planned out now but haven't got the money to do it.
Yeah, basically. You'll end up with not empty promises, just developers might just go, well, what's the point? Let's move on to our next game. And then you end up with possibly a game that is by design unfinished.
I mean, with Final Fantasy, if it was a publishing stunt, it's worked without a doubt. It's still being talked about a year after release. They've spread it out, and it's keeping the popularity of it alive. And the actual debater, I'm actually really enjoying. I'd recommend anyone to even just give it a go. It's really fun. But my worry is that it becomes the norm. If it becomes the norm, as Trench was saying, we then end up having products that is half-arsed. We've got our money. We don't have to put any more effort in it. And that is a bad thing for the whole industry.
Trigger warning. I just want to say that I think Final Fantasy died after Final Fantasy X.
I think it died just before Final Fantasy X.
Yes.
As someone who's never played.
No, thank you. No Tidus. Just go before that.
But
I've never
Blitzball.
played Final Fantasy, so for me,
Blitzball was great, but that is not a substitute for a good Final Fantasy game.
To be honest, with the amount of spin-offs that they've done of Final Fantasy games, I'm surprised that they haven't done a standalone Blitzball game. And if they did, I would play the hell out of that.
Agreed.
See, I have no idea what you guys are talking about because I have never ever played a Final Fantasy game in my life until Final Fantasy 15.
I recommend that you work backwards through them. I honestly sorely recommend that you start with 9 because that was magical, and I think that might be my favourite. I know that's a controversial opinion. And then you go to 8, which was like trying to look humanoid, but dated already at the time. And then 7 was like big plot twist. It was like a mess of a story. I think at my age at the time when I played that, it took like 2 or 3 playthroughs before I was like, oh, yeah, right, okay, cool. I'm just going to go to the Golden Saucer. And then like 6 and 5 and, by the time you reach 1, 1 is just like RPG dilute, but it's still, I would say, pretty important to the modern structure of RPGs. And then after that, you can start playing wicked games like Wizardry and Jagged Alliance and stuff, which obviously inspired it. Less so Jagged Alliance. But...
Well, actually, this one thing actually I'm going to try and cut in as well is, obviously the beta was obviously it's an add-on. One thing which I am on the fence with is the lore, because not coming into the Final Fantasy, I had no understanding of it. So before Final Fantasy XV came out, they brought out Kingsglaive, the Final Fantasy movie, which basically gives you at least for me, it gave me a good understanding of what the hell the game was all about. At the same time, I enjoyed it, but at the same time, I was hesitant because it's very similar to, and I hiss when I say this word, Destiny, where they kind of put the lore in an awkward way of doing it. It was like cards.
If you've worked on a game for a decade and you can't tell the story inside of the game, I think you failed fundamentally as a writer. I'm sorry.
Wait, it tells the story, but it doesn't give you the history, and that's what they did with the film. And the question is that going to become the norm? If they're going to go, well, actually, as point of saying, we haven't got the time to do that, so let's get another department to just give us a backstory with an anime or a movie, push that in, that gives us a whole load of money and funds, and now we can move on to the story, the main story, which we're going to focus on.
Honestly, If I must say so, I think that's the first time that Final Fantasy have ever done it, and probably the last time that it will ever do it. Normally, they completely deep end you into a new universe. Every single game is different than the last. Final Fantasy X is this big kind of flooded world, and you know, there's this apparently big technology-driven world that you've been thrust from, and all of these people are speaking foreign languages, and you're fighting your way across the land to find your father and find the truth. And Final Fantasy IX is this kind of rich fantasy world where you're just trying to defeat the big bad who's trying to destroy the world very much. Final Fantasy VIII is all about amnesia once again. It's just kind of a Final Fantasy trope. Once again, like I said earlier, it's trying to look realistic, but it's almost a weird science fiction post-apocalyptic setting, and all of them just dump you into the setting, and you learn it there and then. I mean,
well, I also agree with Final Fantasy XV. It has happened before with Halo. So
I was talking Final Fantasy, sorry, but yeah,
no, but in terms of, it seems to be that this is becoming. Again, it's the precedent's already been set, and this is potentially what could potentially happen. You looked at Halo; they did they did a bit of a lore film-wise for Master Chief before Halo 5 came out, and then also about a year later, Final Fantasy does the same sort of thing. You're thinking, this is starting to, it's more and more, this was never ever the case, and now it seems to be. It used to be like, I think if it was on Dead Space, they did the game and then they did something after it. Now it seems to be it's on the head, really.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time with these things, I think they're supplemental. A lot of the time they're not directly to do with the game, and I think in many cases it's the game developer going, well, they've developed this world, and it's kind of, I can't tell everything in the game because there's not a way to do it and all that kind of stuff. So they tell it in a different way. It's like especially with Square Enix as well, like the not Final Fantasy, the Kingdom Hearts games, the new collections that you can get on PS3 and PS4 have they have remasters of a couple of games, but I mean there's about 13 Kingdom Hearts games now. So on some of those discs you've got just the cinematics from the games. And that without even playing the games, you can get the entirety of the story and then carry on to the next game or whatever. But I think a lot of these ones, like Dead Space, it's just like, so I've created this world, but there's not a real way of
how do we beef it up?
Telling the narrative in a third person action game. I want to go elsewhere and tell the story of the world that I've created. But like Dan was saying, Final Fantasy, I mean, there's commonalities, there's Moogles and Chocobos and things like that, but generally speaking, every single story is totally different. It's set in the same universe, but you can play almost any of them, and that's why it did lead to things like, Final Fantasy X and then X2, and then there's 13 and there's 13.2 and 13.3. They're the direct sequel games. All the rest of them are completely different. Except Sid. Sid appears everywhere. I don't know what's going on with that. He's some kind of magic dude that just transcends time and space, but generally, yeah, everything's different, so you can jump in anywhere and you haven't got to worry about it too much.
Sid has always got something to do with airships as well, and Biggs and Wedge show up a couple of times as well.
Or a sexy mechanic in Final Fantasy XV, which pissed me off.
What mechanic?
A sexy mechanic in Final Fantasy XV, right?
Wait, a game mechanic that's sexy?
No, Sid was a mechanic, yeah, in...
Oh, I missed that. There was some gender swap thing that I saw at one point. But yeah, no, I haven't played 15, and I've only seen people driving around in a car. So
yeah,
and heard good things, but yeah,
it caused a bit of controversy when it first started. Well, when people first found about it.
Going back to that entire Shaloub sexy thing, it's completely stupid and unnecessary. By the way, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm actually going to defend Final Fantasy X a little bit. I think Final Fantasy X had redeeming qualities. I do think things started to go off the rails a little bit but I still think it was a decent game.
My problem with 10, and my only problem with 10, was that it dragged you. It literally grabbed you by the hand and said, the next section you're going to is here.
Yeah.
And now you're going here. And now you're going here. And it took literally 2/3 of the game before you got an open world map. And the next game that I tried, and I really wish I tried 12 because I've heard nothing but good things about 12. It's in the setting of one of my favorite games, which is Vagrant Story. And it's in the art style, and it actually turns out that it's a grid-based, turn-based kind of game. But I skipped that for some reason because I didn't like Final Fantasy after what kind of 10 did to me. And the next Final Fantasy that I played was Final Fantasy 13, which was just all about just changing rock, paper, scissors formulations and formations. And once again, that game dragged you until I think it was the 11th chapter before it gobbed you out into a world map that, you know, didn't even have a place you could go and gamble.
Sorry, just going back on that, the controversy over Sid in Final Fantasy XV was completely displaced because everyone thought that Sid was this young hot girl now, and it was like, no, that's his granddaughter or something, because the old man Sid is in the game.
That's right. Yep.
So people got up in arms over nothing. Basically, it was just a relative.
Well, I think they got up in arms as to why is she overtly sexualized. You know, her top does give you a bit of cleavage glimpse.
Yeah, I've never had my car fixed by a supermodel like that ever.
Wait a minute, you're from the US. You're telling me that that's not happening? It's just.
But I keep seeing all these adverts
exactly.
of America, and in America, there's all of these supermodels fixing things.
Sorry to disappoint you guys. It's all a lie. It's all a lie.
Really?
Anyway.
So you're just British people with, like, I don't know, more coffee rather than tea?
Basically, yes.
Right, anyway, let's
higher cholesterol.